Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Happy birthday to you.
Hello. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander, and each week we explore what's working and what's not in our friendships, community, and connections. Have you ever wished you could sit down and have a conversation about what is really going on in your friendships? Well, you found your people. Join us as we dive into real-life stories and explore new ways to approach these connections. Together, we're reimagining the rules of friendship. This episode, in my mind, had a very specific focus and track when I hit record. And it was one of those episodes where very quickly it became evident that we were going to have an even better conversation if I just let us go down this other track. You see, today's guest is Sarah Siegert, and Sarah is a friendship coach for expats. So that's what I thought we were going to talk about. The challenges of making friends as an expat. You should definitely go check her out on social media, on her website, her work. She is the person to go find if you want to talk about friendships as an expat. But this episode, I feel like we got even deeper because what we ended up talking about was how at the core of all of our friendships, what is so important, what is maybe the most important, are the beliefs you hold about yourself as a friend. What is your inner monologue? What stories are you telling yourself? What are your internal messages? What runs through your mind? Because if those are negative, if they brand you as somebody who can't possibly do this, if you are bad at friendship, bad at small talk, uncomfortable in conversations, not good at meeting new people. Like if these are the things that you are saying to yourself, the beliefs you hold as truth, then the most important thing you can do for yourself is to rewrite those beliefs. That will change everything for you. And as you'll hear Sarah and I talk about in the episode, not only will it change everything for you right now, but we believe that when you do this, when you rewrite your friendship beliefs, those new beliefs will stick with you through all the rest of the relationships you have in your life. And if there are moments where your friendship beliefs like elude you and you fall back into that negative pattern, it is so much easier to tap back in to the positive friendship beliefs quicker because you know how to rein your brain in. This episode is maybe one of the most important I've ever recorded, because I think it really does get at the heart of so many people's struggle. Now, let me tell you about the delightful woman I had a chance to talk to on this episode. Sarah Siegert is a friendship coach and the founder of Friendships Abroad. Sarah moved from Hamburg to London in 2019 to live with her fiance. In the first 2 years, she had 0 friends, felt lonely, isolated, and low, until she decided that it was time to change her life. Through coaching herself and completing a ton of research on how to make friends, she was able to meet people and create meaningful connections. Now she's helping other people who live abroad to overcome their loneliness by creating deep and meaningful connections so that they can start thriving abroad and enjoying their lives again. Let's dive into today's episode. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I've been so excited. I've been looking forward to chatting with you and so excited. Thank you for having me.
It's just always so fun to take my internet friends and bring them to the microphone, to everybody else. Like nobody has any idea that we're commenting on each other's stuff and things like that. So for everybody out there, you'll just have heard the intro. Sarah is another person working in the friendship space. Her company is Friendships Abroad. And Why don't you tell people, in your words, a little bit about friendships abroad and the work you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I help people who live abroad to create meaningful connections and overcome their loneliness. So I have been doing that for 2 years now. And the reason why I have been doing this and I am doing this is because that was something that I really struggled with when I moved abroad myself. So loneliness is a big factor for everyone, but especially when you move and you start from scratch in a whole different country, in a whole different environment, you realize how many challenges you might actually face and how difficult it is. So now I'm supporting people who go through these challenges to overcome them and to make friends and actually build that support network that they need to really thrive in that new environment.
Well, the work you're doing is so important. We get so many people who come on the podcast or on the platform who have just moved or, are expats. I mean, we're going to talk today about immigration.
Yeah.
We're also mobile now in the world. This is such a big thing. And it can be so overwhelming. I mean, not only do you arrive in this place and you don't know where the grocery store is.
Yes.
That's like a pretty alarming feeling to be like, I don't even know where I go to get food and I have to Google it. Like, how do I get there? But then you add in all the other layers of, depending on where people move, like maybe a language, new currency. And then on top of all of that, finding help is normally through people, which you also don't have necessarily.
Yeah.
That's a big transition for people. So when you work with people, do you want to talk a little bit about your coaching services? Like who would come to you? I think that's helpful for people to know.
Definitely. Yeah. So I usually work with people who have lived abroad for a little while, for a couple of months, who have then realized, oh gosh, this is actually harder than I thought to build a support network and to make friends. And then they realize that actually that's the first time they've moved and they've realized it's actually harder to make friends as adults. And then on top of that, I'm having difficulties maybe navigating that new language that I have to speak now. Or maybe it's someone who finds the culture really difficult to navigate. So many of my clients move somewhere where they currently experience a whole different way of people interacting with each other and like how to do small talk. So whatever they've learned isn't applicable anymore. And then they have to manage that. And that creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of feelings like I could be doing something wrong and I don't want to do anything wrong. I don't want to be rejected. So I'm not doing anything at all. And then oftentimes they isolate themselves. And I also work with people who have maybe even had issues with making friends before they have moved. So people who might have some difficulties feeling confident or they don't feel worthy and not likable because their self-image and their self-worth and the perception of themselves is quite low and quite negative. So then moving and being somewhere completely out of your comfort zone is even more challenging and puts another layer of difficulty on top of that already quite difficult relationship they might have with themselves.
I mean, the social customs piece is, like a whole nother layer I actually hadn't even thought about.
Yeah.
I mean, I've experienced that when I travel, but to then move somewhere and have that like as an added pressure to feeling integrated. I talk a lot about this idea of communities, which could be the place you live.
Yeah.
Feeling like you belong there takes a while. And what you're saying makes me think of that. Like every time you walk out your door, if you don't feel like you belong there, that's like a whole additional level of anxiety.
Yes. Yes. And funny enough that you say that, that was something that I really experienced when I moved here. So I'm from Germany. I moved to London in 2019.
Yeah. Tell people a little bit about your story.
Yeah. So I'm from Germany and I met my partner here in the UK in London. And then after a couple of months of a long distance relationship, I then decided that's not for me and I'm just going to move and try out if it works, which is quite a bold move looking back at it. It didn't feel like that at the time, but I moved, and the thing that really helped me was I said, I'm going to stay for 8 months. And I had a security blanket to go back to my job. I kept my job and I kept my apartment back in Germany. And that was really helpful because it created a lot of safety within myself to not have that pressure of having to make it work. And if it doesn't, I can just go back. So I had that security blanket, which really helped me. But despite that, I felt when the first couple of weeks, I remember I was walking through the streets and like went to the bus stop, and I just thought, no one knows me here. No one cares about me. Like I felt like an alien just walking on a different planet of like, where am I? Who are all these people? You know, I didn't feel like I belong. And it was a really challenging experience just because you really want to belong, you want to fit in, but there's something that where you feel different. And it might be the language. For me, it was always, even when I engaged with people and we had similarities, I always focused on the differences of like, I might have watched a different TV show than they did when we grew up. And I went to school in a whole different school setting and school system. So there were so many differences alongside all the similarities. But what my brain did was focus on all the differences. And so I never felt like I actually fit in and I'm similar to them and we can kind of connect. That was always very hard for me in the beginning. So fitting in a different country is something that is quite challenging, or can be quite challenging. It depends, not for everyone. And I think that's really interesting as well, how some people don't have any issues with that at all, whereas they might have moved from the same country to the same country, but it's just how they're managing the move and how they're managing everything around it.
First of all, have you ever heard, I want to say it's a bias.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm going to have to look it up. But we have like our brains attached to the negative.
Yeah. Negative bias. Yeah.
That is like scientifically proven. Okay. That's what I thought it was.
Well done.
Our brains, it's scientifically proven, like look for the negatives. Those stand out almost in bold in comparison to the positives. So I think you're right. It's really training our brains to see the similarities or the positives. I talk about this too, this thing called the liking gap, and how, you know, we assume that people like us less than science shows that they do. And we're so focused on the way their eyes dart to the side instead of connecting to us. Like we're focused on even the negative facial interactions or movements, body language that we perceive as negative, but they may not even be about us. It might be that a dog was running across the street and somebody's eyes darted, but because they moved and it was behind us, we assume that it's because of us. And then that goes to what you're saying, that like some people move and they don't have as hard of a time. And I don't know this, but I would wonder if it's because they maybe have kind of developed that positive muscle or that like curiosity muscle. So their brain isn't jumping to the negative. Like it's still uncomfortable.
Yeah.
There's no way to get around the fact that it's uncomfortable to be in a new place, but they aren't having to overcome the negativity bias and the discomfort.
Yeah, definitely. So what comes up for me for that? So when we think about our brain and how it works is whatever we believe, your brain tries to prove you right and tries to prove your belief right. So when we start out with already an insecurity within ourselves, for example, or if we already think, or maybe other people don't really like us, your brain is going to see and interpret everything fitting to that belief so that you're being proven right. And it's not just that it sees and interprets, but it blends out all contrary evidence. You know, like we said, it blends out all the similarities because it focuses on all the differences. It blends out on all the ways that people are trying to connect with you. You don't even see them. And that's the worst part, because so many people that come to me as well and that work with me are so stuck in this, people don't like me and here's why it's true. And then they give me all this evidence and it is true. Like the facts are true, but the interpretation of the facts is according to their beliefs, and their brain is trying to prove them right. And so they only see that, and they only make those facts mean that there is maybe something wrong or that people don't like them. And so, yeah, it's completely right what you said. And I think the difference for people who move abroad and might not have that issue is that they might have not had that underlying belief within them to start with. I think the starting points might be different for those two groups of people. So they don't even, it's actually a good example is when I moved, for me, there was no difference between locals and other internationals. So my brain didn't even make that a difference. So for me, I had no different approach or opinion about whether to make friends with expats or internationals or locals. For me, that was not even a thing. Now, since I do this work, what I hear many expats and internationals say is that they have a really hard time connecting with locals.
I've heard that too from people.
Because my brain didn't even know that this is a thing. It wasn't a thing. When you go into it and you might have made some experiences and maybe you had some thoughts of, oh, I'm going to struggle to connect with locals and here's all the reasons why. And then you move and then you will struggle. So it's really interesting how your brain just focuses on certain things and oftentimes on negative things. And it's really hindering us to make friends.
Yeah. I mean, our brain looks for the confirmation bias. Our brain looks for evidence to prove the belief we have. When you first moved, I mean, you talked about being uncomfortable in this place because you wanted to stay there long term. Did you feel like there was any additional pressure when it came to making connections, or maybe it was motivation? What was the feelings when you were trying to put yourself out there in the beginning?
So I was in the first 8 months or first 6 months, let's say, I was quite unattached to whether this is going to work out. I did my best for it to work out and it did, but I didn't actually start putting any effort into making friends for the first probably 1.5 years. So to give you a bit of background and to make that, to explain that a bit. So I moved here for my partner who has grown up here, who has and had a really great supportive network of family and friends who were amazing towards me as well and who really brought me into their group, and there was never any issues. So we always had people to spend time with and to socialize with. So I never really lacked that in the beginning, which is why I never felt the need to really work on creating any connections for myself for the first couple of months. But then what I realized, then obviously the pandemic hit a year and a couple of months in after I moved here. And then we couldn't see his friends and family anymore. And then we couldn't do, or not as often anyway. And then I really felt the kind of shift within me of realizing that even though we had people to hang out with, they were mostly my partner's friends and my partner's family. And I didn't actually have anyone here for myself. And that's when I started realizing that that is something that I want to change. And in the beginning, I wasn't even close to actually taking action towards it. In the beginning, it was more kind of really being the victim of my story and of my experience. And, I shouldn't have no friends and I should have people, but I didn't do anything for it at the same time. So that was funny. But I think when you move abroad with the intent to stay, I think the importance of making friends can be very different than when you move abroad for maybe just a short term or when you travel, because you will realize, I think, later sort of a year in, how important it is to have friends and how important it is to have that network. And then I think then it probably clicks for you to realize what I've been doing so far hasn't worked or isn't enough for me to actually create that network, and something needs to change. But I think it can go both ways. Like you say, it can be a motivation, but it can also be probably quite a lot of pressure to build that network and maybe even bring out these worries and fears and anxieties that you might have towards like meeting new people and being vulnerable and trusting people again, when you realize that it is so important, it can put pressure on it, for sure.
I want to point out something Sarah said, which is when she talked about how she had all of her partner's friends. And I think that this can happen to people in a variety of scenarios. It definitely happens after a move, whether it is all your partner's friends, or maybe you moved to a city where you already had like a close friend that lives there. Not a whole group of friends, but like a close friend. And that person has developed relationships and they keep inviting you to things. So now you're kind of this extra invite in your friend's friend group, but you don't actually feel connected. I also hear about this with people who maybe get into a new relationship. Maybe you have let some of your friendships go to the wayside. I'm saying that neutrally. I don't know. Maybe that was a good thing. Maybe that wasn't a good thing. I don't know. Or maybe your partner's friend group is just like super active and has kind of become all consuming. I've heard that from people before too. You don't really feel like they're your friends, but you keep getting invited and going to these activities. And when I talk to people who are in this scenario, quite often what they will tell me is, well, I'm not alone. Like they're not really my friends, but I'm not completely alone, especially after like that move scenario, right? You're not completely personless in the new city. And so they're like, I should just be grateful that I have people here. And I want to tell you that just because you are grateful that you have people in whatever this scenario is, it's not an either or. Like you can be grateful and you can want to develop your own friendships. You can be grateful and you can feel like you want something that is your own. I'm giving you permission to do that. You're like, okay, great. So I can develop something of my own. That could be going out there and meeting completely new friends. That is definitely an option. You can also take this group of people that you just met, and if there are people in there that feel like they could be really good friends of yours, you can lean in and you can really connect with one of those people. Like develop an actual friendship outside of the group where you can text that person, contact that person without your partner or your friend being the conduit. Like put the energy into developing that relationship. And I have been in some of those relationships. They're beautiful and they are great. And in the end, sometimes I am closer to my new friend than I am the very established friend in our friend group. And that's not any fault. We just like really clicked. We aligned. We have a bunch of interests. Our season of life is matching up. If you want to do this, if you want to go in and develop a friendship with somebody in a group where you kind of feel like the extra, I would suggest checking out episode 42 with Brandy. That episode is about friendship trios, but we really talk about the dynamics of developing a close personal relationship kind of within a group setting. And I think that that would help you. This is going to sound like it's kind of a pivot question, but it's not. I have somewhere I'm going with it, but I'm curious on your take. Do you think that friendship is like a habit or a skill or a muscle? It's like something you can develop.
Yes, I think definitely. I think it is something that we have to consciously choose, and probably depending on where we start at, I think probably develop, like not the friendship, like we have to develop a friendship as well, but the skills and everything that is required to build it. I think wherever we start from, like some people might start from a place of actually, I don't have any issues with it and it comes really easy to me. Those aren't necessarily the people that I work with because they don't need any support, right? But the people who I usually work with, definitely friendship and building friendships and making friends is something that they have to. And it's interesting, like you say, a habit, because we have habits and habits are just, repetitively practiced activities or things that we devote our time to. And when we have lived for a while in a life of maybe more isolation or being an introvert, not really socializing much, then doing the opposite is going to be very uncomfortable, like all of a sudden going out and meeting people. So we have to really, practice that and make it a new habit for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I like the word habit for friendship because if I think of some of my habits, like brushing my teeth. Let's use that as an example. It's not to say I never get really busy and like kind of forget to brush my teeth for an hour or two in the morning, but there's a cue in my brain where at a certain point I'm like, oh wait, I didn't do that today. Then I want to do it. And so I think for friendship, you can kind of develop that where if it's been a little while since you've had some connection with someone or seen a certain friend or joined a community organization, whatever your habits are, everybody's are going to be different. It does kind of give that little cue to you of like, I need to initiate that thing. And it feels almost unnatural not to do it at a certain point.
Yeah.
But obviously it takes repetition to build into that, which is what we were saying is like, it's a skill you develop. And if you're not used to this, it's going to take some really conscious effort in the beginning to get to a place where it does feel a little bit more like a habit. I think that's my take on it.
Yeah. I love that way of looking at it as a habit because it is like a habit, like you say, brushing our teeth or going to the gym. For some people, that is a habit. There's no way that they don't do it. But like you say, a habit needs to be developed. And also for a habit to be developed, you have to have a really good reason to create that habit and to keep that habit up. When we don't really feel like we have a good enough reason or whatever we get out of it isn't enticing enough, we're not going to keep up with it. And for some people, I think when you struggle with social anxiety and when you struggle with self-esteem and worrying about being rejected, it isn't going to feel great to go out and meet people in the beginning unless you have done it a couple of times and you have really felt the connection and you have made a friend and you have witnessed how amazing it is. Then you might be able to tell your brain, I know that we feel really worried and anxious towards doing it, but look, like that is what we get out of it. And then it becomes, I think, easier to create that habit and keep it up.
Yeah. I talk about this on my socials all the time. I am a very extroverted person who at this point is pretty practiced in social interactions. I put myself, not only just because it's me and my personality, do I do things on my own or join new groups or do things like that, but honestly, I push myself even harder because now I do this work. So I almost want to like test certain things out. And I know that there are people out there that have a lot of social anxiety. And so then I almost feel like I need to push myself harder to try and experience some of that sometimes, like get some sense of what people might feel. I don't even know if I come close, but I'm trying sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm telling you that because doing that really proves like even a very extroverted person, there's still anxiety almost every time I walk into a room with people I don't know.
Yeah.
Every time I get on a Zoom call with someone I've just met, like the scale of it is, I'm sure, very different from somebody with social anxiety or who just doesn't do this very often, like hasn't developed this habit yet. But I do think that over time, the intensity gets less. And I think you start to trust yourself that even when you're in that space and you're doing something that's uncomfortable, you almost have like muscle memory on how to ask somebody the first question and get the momentum going in that interaction. And you trust yourself that even though your brain is screaming like, don't go to that party, you don't want to be there, you don't know anybody, like that still happens to me. I do have this sense of trust because I've done it enough times that I can go in, I can talk to one person at a certain point, it'll get easier. And if it doesn't get easier and I still hate it after a certain period of time, I can go home. That's okay. So I think we all develop that. But the reason I asked you the question about the skills and the habits and the whatever is because we've been talking a lot about how some people move and they seem fine, and other people move and it's very overwhelming. And I think that a huge piece of that has to be whether you have ever developed these skills and habits and confidence in yourself previously. And I think that once you learn how to do this and you put yourself out there and you lower the anxiety levels because you trust yourself that you can do it, I think that's a skill that stays with you forever. That's my take. I had a very vivid moment. I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast before. I live in Seattle and I've lived here for the majority of my life. I moved away for college, but I've lived here the majority of my life. And a lot of friends live here. A lot of friends from college moved here. And we ended up with a lot of like this big mix of college friends, high school friends, friends from our first jobs when we were younger. And there was probably this group of 12 to 15 of us who then got significant others. So now it's like 30. We had this like big friend group that everybody lived here. And in I want to say like 6-month period, 10 people of that 30 moved away.
Wow.
Like it was a lot of people really suddenly. And other people that stayed here had big life changes. They moved, an hour away. So I don't consider that moving away, but they moved a little further, or people were having babies, things like that. Like life was changing very intensely in a 6-month period. And I had this moment where I was really sad about all the change, just kind of grieving that like things were going to be different. But I realized if this is really what I want, if I like this feeling of being able to call people, have a bunch of people who are around to go for a walk or hang out at the beach or do something like that, I can rebuild that if I want. Like I have the skills to do this again. And so for anybody out there, I really do think once you develop this, it's something that sticks with you. That's my take. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it is very similar to riding a bike or learning how to drive. And then maybe you don't get, like, actually, I used to drive in Germany and then I didn't drive for the first couple of years here. I had the biggest anxiety ever to drive again here because in the UK, it's on the different side of the road, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
I had to use do the gears with my wrong hand. So everything was wrong. I had the biggest anxieties. The road are really narrow here. It's the perfect example. I focused on all the worst case scenarios of what might happen if I get in the car and how I can't do it. I brought myself to do it. I nearly drove our wing mirror off doing it. And then I was like, okay, this is the worst. Like, I can't do this again. Didn't drive again for a couple of months. And then at some point I was like, okay, I just have to get back into it because I wanted it. And it's very similar, I think, when we, people who might not have that support network, these friendships, it's not that they stay in this position because they want to necessarily, right? The people that I work with, the people that in your community, they might be in a space where they don't have as many or not at all friendships and they would like to have some. It's not that they like where they are, but they just, for whatever reason, feel able to create them. And so back to the driving example, I had the biggest anxiety and at some point I just did it. And it took me a couple of attempts and a couple of times with very sweaty hands driving and like being very conscious and anxious doing it. And now I drive and it's no problem at all. So I think it is similar because it is like a skill that you learn to make friends and to create connections. And maybe you haven't done it for a while and then you get back into it and you might be a bit rusty in the beginning, but you will get back into it. And like you say, you will remember that you can do this and that you can trust yourself. And there are fears and that there are worries that we have as human beings, even as an extrovert, or even if you trust yourself and have done it a couple of times, there will be worries that your brain's going to come up with, thinking that being rejected is the worst that can happen. And that's applicable to every human being and that's never going to go away, but how to manage it and how to acknowledge it and then not let that take over, not let that be in the driving seat, but let that be on the passenger seat and still do the thing that you want to do. I think that is the difference of like giving into the fears or learning how to manage them and let them be there without making them mean something bigger than what they are.
I agree.
Yeah.
So if we take this back to you and your experience, now that we kind of talked about this, I think what you were saying about developing with your partners, friends, and family makes a lot of sense. They are new people to you. You were making new connections. Like, sure, they wanted to meet you because you're, with your partner and things like that. But like, that's a lot of energy still to invest and figure out how to fit in with all of that and develop your own connections with these people. But when you decided, okay, I also want to make some friends, do you feel like you had that skill set? What was holding you back from doing that before, I guess?
So that is the perfect question, because I didn't feel like I had that mindset, that habit, that skill set. So what held me back? I am an introvert and I always have been. But the way that I like to look at introversion and extroversion isn't necessarily like other people tend to look at it. So many people think or say I'm an introvert and so therefore I'm struggling to make friends. But the way that I like to think about introverts is that they simply recharge their energy in situations where they might be by themselves or in like quiet environments with maybe they're very close people, where they don't have to feel like I have to play a role or I have to be someone who I'm not, where they can fully relax. That is my experience. When I'm at home with my fiance, even with my closest friends, I can fully relax, and this is how I recharge my batteries. Whereas social situations where I may be in a bigger group or maybe with newer people, my energy is being drained because I feel not that I have to play a role. I'm always very consciously myself and I'm not making any efforts not to be myself, but it is something that is requiring in my energy. I don't know how to else describe it. I hope that makes sense.
It does. I have the same view on introversion versus extroversion. So for that big group I was talking about, one time we asked everybody whether they thought they were an introvert and extrovert. And this is like 30 people, remember. 3 people, me, my husband, and our friend Drew, decided that we all thought we were the only extroverts. 27 introverts, 3 extroverts. Now, there are lots of people who, when we are together, have a lot of energy, I guess. Right? They're active, they're talking, they're not like quiet. But during lockdown was actually the biggest example of this ever, Sarah, because as 2 extroverts, my husband and I were home all the time, and that's fine. But when we got to the point where, you'd like go meet up for a friend for a walk, I would go do that, and I would come home bouncing off the walls. I had so much energy, and I would walk in the house and my husband would be like, whoa, what happened to you? And that, because it was so few and far between interactions, is exactly what we're talking about. Like, I am truly recharged when I am with other people. I come home and I'm on another level. Yeah. And that's definitely not how other people are.
Yeah. But it's so interesting. I love that. I love literally, because my partner is an extrovert. I'm an introvert. So I'm like, I don't want to go out. Let's just stay at home and watch a nice movie. And he's like, oh, I need people. Like, I need to hang out with people. And very similar to you, like, really feel I've spoken to people and a different thing. But what happens a lot is that people think that being an introvert means that you can't make friends or that you have a harder time making friends. And I find that such a shame for people, because they use that as an excuse, or they think it is a barrier, and it really isn't. Like, I'm an introvert. I'm a big introvert, and I don't have any issues making friends. What is important is that I maintain a good balance between social time and my own time. And as soon as you do that, you will be able to keep up doing both things. You will be able to maintain friendships, build new friendships. You just have to be aware that you have to take some time for yourself. But with that, I had always had that kind of my own time. So the time that I can devote towards socializing is kind of limited, because I have to look after my mental health and my energy and everything like that. So when I moved here, so that was a thing. Another thing, luckily the language didn't hinder me, but for me, there was a lot about my self-confidence and my self-image and how I thought about myself. And how I then thought about others, and we aren't able to connect because of all of these reasons, like I shared in the beginning. And I just never really thought that people would like me and that they want to be friends with me and that they would, I don't know, want to hang out with me. So I had a really quite harsh and negative opinion about me and my worthiness, I guess, as a friend, my likability. So that really hindered me. And so then another thing was I never felt like I could find people who I could connect with. I always told myself people are very different. They want different things than what I want out of a friendship. So I never really actually gave it a proper go. I never really fully committed to it and tried it out, because as soon as I did, I met people who wanted the same thing that I wanted, who liked me, right? So I made up this whole story that really hindered me from making friends, going out to see people and making connections. And that's not to say that everything went smoothly as soon as I took action. That's not the case at all. Like I had loads of friendship dates and got ghosted, and then some I didn't like, some they didn't like me. Not, it wasn't like a fairy tale all of a sudden. But what hindered me the most was the stories that I made up about myself and about other people, and how that is the reason I can't connect.
Listen, stories are complicated things to untangle. And I just want to acknowledge that, because the first step is even just noticing your stories. In these moments, the things that you're saying to yourself all the time, right? I'm a bad friend. I'm bad at communicating. I am awkward. I'm bad at small talk. I'm never showing up for my friends in the way they need me. Like, these are all stories. And the first step is just to notice your stories. So if you don't know what your stories are, you don't need to try and solve them. That's what I'm trying to say. You don't need to try and solve them right away. The first step is just to start to notice what they are. Let that be your new goal if this is something you think you're struggling with. So when you say you took action, what are some of the things you did when you decided, okay, I'm committing, I'm going to make this happen. No more me saying I'm the problem. Like, I got to try it.
Yeah.
What did you do?
So I went on to like friendship apps where people like Bumble, BFF, I think I used. I just did a conscious effort in meeting people. And so I used this app, which was quite accessible and easy for me to use. I engaged with people more deeply as well. So with existing people, I actually made an effort to getting to know them better, to connecting with them. So finding out more, finding similarities, being able to connect with them, meeting new people. But alongside that, like that was the action that I took. But alongside that, what I had to do was tidy up all the stuff that was within me, like all of these beliefs, because I could have gone to 100 friendship dates with amazing people that would have liked to be friends with me. But if I didn't tidy up my thoughts about how they don't like me and how we can't connect, I would have never been able to make any friends. So I just want to emphasize the importance really on doing that work alongside taking like some tangible action. So it's all about really being clear who would be someone, who would you get on well with, like knowing yourself, identifying who could be a potential friend match, like what would they be interested in, what would be their values, and then really finding them, being creative, finding lots of different ways, like volunteering, friendship apps, Facebook groups. There are loads of different ways to do this. And then it's just about connecting with them, being committed to building this friendship, trusting them, trusting you, sharing things, asking questions. There are loads of like actions that you take or can take, but none of them work if you don't have the right mindset to support you while taking these actions. So I really noticed, that was the biggest part probably.
Nobody can see me because it's going to be an audio podcast, but I'm over here with the biggest smile. I love talking to other people who do this work because there's so many similarities in how we're all approaching this, which to me just means, making friends is kind of a universal experience. Are there nuances? Absolutely. Are we all going to approach it in different ways? Yes. But what you were talking about doing the inner work, and also just spending some time to be intentional about who you're trying to meet, right? I talk all the time about being specific, that it's so overwhelming if you just say, I want to make a new friend, and then you walk out into the world and you walk by 1,000 people today. Like, whoa, like, are they my friend? Are they my friend? Are they my friend? Are they my friend? I don't know. Your brain, that's really what your brain is doing. And that's a lot. You don't have any filters. And so I think getting specific, if we circle this like all the way back to the beginning of the episode, it gives our brain something to focus on. And I do think that kind of helps override some of that focus on the negativity, because it's hard to focus on both because you're so focused on trying to see whether somebody is into a similar interest or wants to spend time in similar ways or enjoys similar topics, that your brain just has to let go a little bit of searching for every negative.
Definitely. And it is like giving your brain a direction to look into and to find out more. And it will do that. Like as soon as you consciously direct your brain where to look at, your brain doesn't have an opinion on what it's looking for. It doesn't care what it's looking for. You just have to tell it what to look for. And obviously we're going to try and tell it to look for something positive, like similarities, and asking questions to find out more about this. And like you say, it can't focus on both things at the same time. So even if it is just focusing on finding similarities for just 10 minutes, that's better than nothing, right? That's 10 minutes of you having come out of your story, maybe of negativity, and have actually at least been in a place that is fairly neutral or even positive to help you strengthen that muscle and strengthen that skill and strengthen that belief. Like,
beliefs are so important.
Yeah. Like beliefs are literally everything. Like I do this work every day on myself with like all different areas of my life. Like belief is everything. You can believe, and you can look at a fact and believe two different things about it. You just really get to choose what you want to believe. And I know that many people struggle with that and think, oh, I don't want to be unreasonable or whatever. But the thing is, you might be unreasonable already, right? Believing that you're not likable isn't any more reasonable. You know, it's so funny. But we think, oh no, we have to be honest and we have to be truthful. Who knows what's the truth? Like that isn't necessarily the truth. You just get to choose what feels best, what helps you get what you want. And believing you're not likable isn't going to help you get that friend that you really want. So you might as well let go of that, which isn't easy. And, you know, believe something different about yourself, because that's as true as anything else.
I mean, and we're looking for evidence to confirm whatever our belief is. So even if you don't have a lot of evidence, if you choose the belief that people enjoy interacting with you instead of I'm unlikable, if you choose the positive belief, that's how your brain will start looking for the evidence.
Yeah.
We're all looking for evidence to confirm our beliefs. So whatever you pick is what your brain is going to be looking for, which is where we go back to like those little interactions we have with people. If you believe you're unlikable, you'll notice the eyes darting to the side, which really is about a dog. If you believe people enjoy interacting with you, you'll notice when they smile.
Yes.
Over time, I think it can override itself, right? You get enough evidence to really feel like that belief is true and not just something you picked. It's not outlandish anymore.
No. And it's like literally learning a different language. Your brain will always go to the default, which is no one likes you. And so every time that comes up, you have to tell your brain, but people do like me and here's why. And I will collect evidence. Like it's really, depending on where you start from, it can be quite a detailed piece of work that you will really have to dedicate time to make that change happen. But it is completely doable. It is literally like a muscle that you will have to train. And like going to the gym, you're not going to have the biggest bicep just from doing a couple of exercises once or twice, right? We have to build it. And completely agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
So when you really leaned in to making friends, when you made that decision, you started putting yourself out there, how long do you think it was until you started to feel like you had some progress, or you had, made a connection that felt good, or whatever your marker is, but something that felt like, oh, okay, I'm actually doing this. Like, this is happening.
I can't remember if this is accurate, but I remember meeting one of my really good friends. Like, the first time we met was amazing, and I felt incredible just at the first time meeting her. And I've just recently have made another new friend, and it was the same, like meeting at the first time. I am like, if I like her and I feel like she likes me, I just am all in. Like,
Yep.
I'm not, waiting for, yeah. So for me, it's really fairly quick. And like you said, I think what is really important is to be clear on the markers. And for me, my marker is how I feel towards that person and how I feel spending time with them. And that is something that I can influence and that I get to choose and create. So I'm not waiting for, my marker isn't whether they text me twice a week or whether they invite me to their birthday party or whatever. I'm using a marker consciously that is within my control so that I can actually create that and then feel connected to that person and feel like this is working and it's amazing. And I have met someone and we get on well. Like, I consciously choose something small that is within my control that makes me feel good towards this connection with someone, as opposed to setting myself up for failure by using a marker that is out of my control and that relies me on kind of waiting for something or needing someone else to do something for me, because that's not usually a good position to be in. I always, in my life and when I help my clients, I always want them to be in control of as much as they can. And I don't ever want them to be out of control, because that's not fun. As soon as we can control something, we can create results for ourselves. So yeah, long story short.
No, I love that. I think that's so important for people to think about, like the marker.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people honestly don't even have a marker.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's kind of this question that I harp on all the time, which is like, what is a friend? So many people are just so focused on the couple of small pieces that are like, well, we don't quite hit that yet. And it's like, well, but you hit 7 other things. So do you feel like there's some connection here? Something? Do you enjoy it? Do you have fun when you're together? Do you talk about things? Like, there's so many, like you're saying, things you can pick. The person can pick. I can pick. So pick one. Like, pick one and let it be okay. You can always pick another one later as your friendship develops and you like want to feel a little closer in a certain way. Like, there's nothing to say you can't keep working towards it, but it doesn't need to be some peak perfect version for it to be worth it. It's so many pieces are worth it before you get there.
And I think on that, when people don't pick a marker that is within their control or that is realistic, or, because when we've met someone once, we're obviously not going to be in a place where we share our biggest secrets and, we cry in front of each other, but that's what we're waiting for. And so they wait to feel connected to that person until that happens, but it won't happen if you don't feel connected. So they set themselves up for so much failure, right?
Yep.
And I think when you don't pick a marker, what happens is your brain is loose. So your brain's like, well, what's happening, right? So it goes back to what it knows, which is the default setting of negativity. So you are not going to get anywhere unless you pick something to look out for. And that is realistic and realistic for you and the time that you have spent with that person together.
I'm giggling because I feel like the summary of this episode is, don't let your brain run loose.
Yes. Yes.
Don't let that happen, which I'm sure I can imagine when you move somewhere, your brain is running loose about everything. This is just another piece of your brain running loose. So this is all just amplified when you are in that situation of moving to a different place.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think as soon as you move out of your comfort zone, like whether it's a move to a different country or whether it's maybe having a baby or something is different than what you used to be, I think that is when your brain's on like survival mode or halfway there, and you can't, like, it's going to be very hard to focus and to set marks, but that's the most important time when you have to do this, to set boundaries for yourself and to like row the boats in again and just focus.
I love this episode, Sarah, because I think it has just grown into, like you were just saying, like I think it's applicable to people in so many situations. We obviously came on here a little bit to talk about when you move somewhere new, but this often happens in the episodes. Like what we talk about can apply to so many things. Like you were saying, a new baby, a new partnership, a loss in your life when you kind of become a new version of yourself. And then suddenly you're uncomfortable and your brain is loose. Your brain is loose in that situation, and it can just really impact all your connections. If you were to leave everybody listening today with some like final words of advice or anything else you feel like you wanted to say today, what would you leave them with?
That friendships or any kind of connections start within yourself. Like if I take anything away from my journey is that you cannot have any healthy relationships, whether it's romantic relationships or friendships, if you haven't done that work within yourself first. Like if you don't feel worthy, if you don't feel likable, if you don't feel good enough, you're always going to seek for external evidence and external validation. And you're always trying to fill holes that no one can fill for yourself but you. And you have to fill those holes before you even go out and create any connection. So that is, I think, the biggest lesson that I've learned doing that work for myself, and the biggest thing that I help my clients with, really. Like it's all the other things, you know, how to have small talk and how to trust people. But as soon as you are at this place where you feel at peace with yourself, where you're fully confident, where you're like, this is me, I love myself, like, you know, who can I connect with? It's going to be so amazing, and everything else will kind of fall into place. There might be some hiccups or whatever, but it's not going to be hard. It's not going to be difficult. It's actually going to be an interesting journey to be on, and you will have fun doing it. But you have to do that work first.
I love that. I talk about it all the time. This should be a fun journey. And I'm going to say goodbye to you, but I do want to just tell anybody out there who's listening that if you're feeling this and you're like, okay, well, how do I do this work on my own? I want to remind you that I know all these really great friendship coaches out there. So send me a DM. You can tell me a little bit about your situation, and I will send you to Sarah or whoever else is like kind of the right fit for your situation. You don't have to do this alone. If you are listening, like this is a lot. It's really a skill set I don't think we are actively taught, and it can be really overwhelming to navigate. So you don't have to do it alone. There are lots of people out there who can help you. And I'm happy to send you off to Sarah or one of my other friends doing this work. So with that, Sarah, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. I love this. I love talking about this topic so much. So thank you.
What did we learn today? Well, I'd say number one, our brains are the wild, wild west, and we really need to pay attention to the thoughts that are running through them. That seems like the number one takeaway. The second takeaway is that we have to do the work on ourselves. I think that we have to do that work to pay attention to our brains, to retrain them, things like that. You know, Sarah mentioned in there that if she had a takeaway for anybody, it would be that you can't have any healthy relationships if you haven't done the work within yourself. And I just want to say that I think, my takeaway, that it's not that you have to have already done the work, but you have to be willing to do the work. When I developed all my friendships when I was in survival mode and trying to like build this family out of friends for myself, I definitely had not done all my self-work at all. Not even a little bit. But I think I did show up constantly willing to do the work. Like when I talk about how I was desperate for connections and I was willing to do a lot of things other people weren't willing to do, one of those things was constantly fail in my relationships and then have to have conversations with friends where I had to like own up to the crappy things I had done and have a conversation and work hard to change my actions and prove to them I would never do that again. So whether you have done the work or you are willing to do the work, I do think that either way, that is probably the most important part of this journey, right? Friendship, I've talked about all the time, is a skill, is a habit. How do we learn any skill or any habit? Through trial and error. So I would say for any of you who are here listening to this, who are already doing work by actively thinking about friendship and community and connections and how you're approaching the stuff in your life, you are doing that work. So keep going. You're doing a great job. With that, I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle at it's Alex Alexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.